There's a version of this story that the internet told for years, and it was cruel. It said that Bruce Willis stopped caring, that he got lazy, that he sold out, that the greatest action hero of his generation had become a ghost of himself, stumbling through forgettable movies, cashing checks, and slowly fading into irrelevance. People mocked him. YouTube channels dissected his decline, comment sections celebrated his fall. And here's the thing that makes all of that so unbearable to look back on now. Every single one of those people was watching something real. They just had no idea what they were actually seeing. They weren't watching a man give up. They were watching a man disappear. And nobody, not the fans, not the critics, not even the people working alongside him on set, fully understood what was happening until it was already too late to do anything but grieve. The man before the myth. Before the explosions, before the catchphrases, before Die Hard made him a household name in every corner of the world, Bruce Willis was just a kid from New Jersey with nothing except ambition and a stubborn refusal to quit. He wasn't handed anything. There were no industry connections, no famous parents, no backdoor deals, just a young man who wanted to be an actor so badly that he was willing to grind through years of obscurity to get there. He moved to New York in his early 20s and did what struggling actors do. He waited tables, tended bar, took whatever odd work kept the lights on, and showed up to auditions in the hope that someone, somewhere, would finally see what he believed he had. For a long time, almost nobody did. He appeared as an extra. He landed minor roles in dramas like The Verdict and Miami Vice. He even tried his hand at music, releasing a soul record in 1986 that most people have completely forgotten about. Nothing stuck. Nothing caught fire. But Bruce Willis didn't leave, and that tells you everything you need to know about who this man was at his core. Because the story of Bruce Willis isn't really a story about talent. Plenty of talented people never make it. It's a story about what happens when talent meets the kind of quiet, unshakable determination that most people simply don't have. And then came Moonlighting, the show that changed everything. In 1985, Bruce Willis was cast as David Addison in the ABC detective comedy drama Moonlighting, opposite Cybill Shepherd. On paper, it wasn't a guaranteed hit. The premise, a wisecracking private detective and a glamorous former model solving crimes while trading romantic tension, could have easily been forgettable television. But Bruce Willis made it something else entirely. What audiences discovered watching that show was a performer unlike almost anyone else on television at the time. He was funny in a way that felt completely effortless. He was charming without being slick. He had this quality, rare in acting and impossible to manufacture, where you felt like you were watching a real person instead of a performance. America fell for him almost immediately. He won the People's Choice Award for Favorite Male in a New TV program. He appeared on every major talk show. Interviewers loved him because he refused to play the game the way most celebrities did. He was self-deprecating, quick-witted, and startlingly honest about his own vulnerabilities. He once said openly on national television that no matter how tough he tried to appear on the outside, he was terrified of what fame was doing to his life. Not many stars at the height of their ascent would admit something like that. But that was Bruce. And then in 1988, everything changed again. Die Hard and the birth of an icon. The movie almost didn't happen the way it did. Action films in the late 1980s had a very specific template. The heroes were massive, almost superhuman. Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Van Damme. They were walking weapons, invincible, untouchable. And then along came Bruce Willis, lean, wisecracking, clearly scared, clearly bleeding, clearly in over his head, and he dismantled the entire formula in 2 hours. John McClane wasn't a machine, He was a man, a stubborn, sarcastic, deeply flawed man who crawled through air ducts and pulled glass shards out of his feet and talked to himself in the dark because he was terrified and had no other choice. Audiences had never seen an action hero like that before, and they loved him for it. Budgeted at $28 million, Die Hard earned over $140 million at the worldwide box office. Critics were stunned, studios were stunned, and Bruce Willis, the bartender from New Jersey who couldn't get a call back for years, was suddenly one of the biggest movie stars on the planet. But here's what made him different from every other star who experienced that kind of overnight explosion. He didn't change. In interview after interview from that era, Bruce Willis talked about his fears, about his mistakes, about his kids, about how much more he cared about being a good father than about any award or box office number. He sat next to Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger and said, on camera, that his children were more interesting to him than pretty much anyone else on Earth. In Hollywood, that kind of honesty is almost unheard of. And it's the thing that made people not just admire him, but genuinely love him. The Golden Decade. The 1990s belonged to Bruce Willis in a way that is difficult to fully appreciate unless you lived through it. He wasn't a one-trick action star, he made sure of that. While the sequels kept coming, Die Hard 2 generated $100 million more than the original. Die Hard with a Vengeance crossed $366 million worldwide. Bruce was quietly, methodically proving that he was something rarer than a blockbuster machine. He was a genuine actor. He played a Vietnam veteran wrestling with PTSD in Country. He voiced a talking baby in Look Who's Talking. He shared scenes with John Travolta and Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction and delivered one of the decade's most magnetic performances with almost no dialogue. And he anchored The Fifth Element, one of the strangest and most visually inventive blockbusters ever made. And then there was The Sixth Sense. In 1999, M. Night Shyamalan cast Bruce Willis as Malcolm Crowe, a child psychologist working with a deeply troubled boy. The film became one of the most talked-about movies of the decade, its twist ending discussed and debated everywhere. What most people forget, or perhaps never noticed, was just how much of that film's emotional power came from the stillness of Bruce Willis's performance. He didn't overact. He never overacted. He had this extraordinary ability to communicate entire inner worlds through the smallest gestures, a particular way of holding himself, a half-second pause, the precise amount of warmth or sadness in a glance. His young co-star Haley Joel Osment would later say publicly that Bruce Willis had one of the most generous hearts of anyone he'd ever worked with on a film set. By the end of the decade, Bruce Willis was ranked among the highest-grossing leading men in Hollywood history. And through all of it, all the acclaim, the money, the fame, he remained the same person he'd always been, a New Jersey guy who just wanted to go home to his kids. The slow unraveling. Nobody noticed at first. That's the thing about what happened to Bruce Willis that makes it so uniquely heartbreaking. The decline was so gradual, so carefully hidden, perhaps even from Bruce himself, that by the time anyone began to understand what they were really witnessing, it had already been going on for years. In the mid-2000s and into the 2010s, the criticism of Bruce. For many of these films, Bruce Willis's actual screen time was shockingly brief. In one, titled Hard Kill, he appears for less than 7 minutes. In others, he sits in a chair for the majority of his scenes. Directors noted he was almost always tied to furniture during what was supposed to be action sequences. At the time, it looked like laziness. It looked like a man who had stopped caring about his craft and was willing to trade his legacy for an easy payday. But that wasn't it. That was never it. Because there were things happening on those sets that the public wouldn't learn about until much later. Things that once revealed reframe everything and make the cruelty of the criticism almost impossible to sit with. What the cameras didn't show. The earpiece came first. Industry insiders who worked on those low-budget productions began quietly telling each other something unusual. Bruce Willis needed his lines fed to him through an earpiece, called an earwig in the industry, on set. Not occasionally, routinely. A handler would read his dialogue to him in real time, and Bruce would repeat it. This is not how working actors operate. Even the most experienced performers need only a script and preparation. The earpiece told a story that nobody was yet willing to say out loud. Then the reports from directors started surfacing. Director Mike Burns, who worked with Bruce on the film Hard Kill in 2020, came forward with a statement that stopped a lot of people cold. He said that after the first day of filming, he could see something was deeply wrong, and that he had been asked by Willis's representatives to shorten his lines significantly before production began. He described watching Bruce Willis on set and realizing with growing unease that the man in front of him was not entirely present. And then there was director Jesse V. Johnson, who'd known Bruce for decades and arrived on set expecting a reunion with an old friend. What he found shook him. He said publicly that Bruce didn't know where he was. Not metaphorically, not in the performative sense of an actor being lost in a difficult role. Bruce Willis, on a working film set, did not know why he was there. Johnson recalled Bruce turning to him and saying with genuine confusion something that translated essentially to, "I know there's a reason I'm here, but I can't figure out what it is." Nearly 20 people, cast members, crew, directors, producers, would eventually come forward with similar accounts. There was a kind of unspoken code on those sets, Johnson said. Nobody wanted to embarrass Bruce. Nobody wanted to make him look bad. So everyone just quietly worked around the gaps, covered for him, and kept filming. And the world kept watching those films and assuming the worst about a man who was quietly, invisibly losing himself. The diagnosis that explained everything. On March 30th, 2022, Bruce Willis's family posted an announcement on social media. It was written carefully, with obvious love, and it said that Bruce had been diagnosed with aphasia, a communication disorder that was affecting his cognitive abilities and forcing him to step away from the career he had devoted his life to. For a moment, the internet went quiet. Aphasia is caused by damage to the language centers of the brain, most commonly through stroke or traumatic injury, but in some rarer and more devastating cases, through a progressive neurological condition that attacks those areas slowly and without mercy. It affects a person's ability to speak, to understand speech, to read, to write, to find words that the mind knows are there but can no longer reach. For an actor, for a man whose entire art form was language, whose gift was making you feel the weight of a single line, whose career had been built on the ability to communicate the full complexity of a human being through precise, deliberate expression, there is perhaps no crueler diagnosis imaginable. And yet it was only the beginning. Less than a year after the aphasia announcement, Bruce's wife Emma revealed that his doctors had arrived at a more specific and more devastating conclusion. Bruce Willis did not have ordinary aphasia. He had frontotemporal dementia. And if you don't know what that is, you need to understand it, because understanding it changes everything about how you see the last decade of Bruce Willis's public life. Frontotemporal dementia. The disease that steals the self. Most people, when they hear the word dementia, think of forgetfulness, of an elderly person who can't remember names or misplaces their keys. They think of something sad but gentle, a slow fogging of the past. Frontotemporal dementia is not that. It targets the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain, the regions responsible for personality, language, decision-making, emotional regulation, and social behavior. And it doesn't just dim those functions, it dismantles them. The personality changes come first, and they are often the most disorienting for the people who love the patient. Someone warm becomes cold. Someone social becomes withdrawn. Someone engaged becomes blank. The person in front of you is still physically present, but something essential, the quality that made them specifically themselves, begins to recede. Bruce's wife Emma described noticing before anyone had a name for what was happening that her husband felt different, removed, not like the man she had married, who was warm and affectionate and present and funny and alive in every room he walked into. She didn't understand what was happening. She thought for a time that something had broken between them in ways she couldn't identify or fix. It wasn't a broken marriage. It was a broken brain. As frontotemporal dementia progresses, it steals language. It steals the ability to find words, to construct sentences, to understand what other people are saying. It steals the knowledge of where you are and why and who the people around you are. It steals the ability to perform the basic tasks of daily life, how to sit down, how to dress, how to navigate a familiar room. And eventually, it steals recognition. The faces of the people you have loved most in the world become puzzles you can no longer solve. There is no treatment that slows it. There is no intervention that reverses it. There is no cure. You are given a diagnosis, and then you go home and you wait. And you love the person for as long as there is enough of them left to love in the way you once did. This is what Bruce Willis and his family have been living inside of. What love looks like when the words are gone. Emma Hemming Willis has become, in the years since her husband's diagnosis, one of the most quietly powerful voices on the subject of caregiving for degenerative brain disease. She has spoken in detail, with extraordinary honesty and evident pain, about what it means to love someone through a diagnosis like this, about the decisions she has had to make, about the guilt and the grief, and the way that grief is different from ordinary grief because the person is still there, still breathing, still sometimes smiling at you across a room, but receding, always receding, further and further from the version of themselves that you fell in love with. She had to limit her daughter's overnight visits. She had to restructure the environment in ways that kept Bruce safe from himself. She had to think every day about the gap between what she wanted to be able to give him and what was actually possible without destroying herself in the process. Her husband's neurologist told her something that changed how she approached everything, that 30% of primary caregivers die before their loved ones do. The stress, the sleeplessness, the relentless emotional weight of watching someone disappear, it doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your body. So Emma made the decision that will always be the hardest kind, the right one that looks wrong from the outside. She arranged for Bruce to live in a second home, close enough to visit, with round-the-clock professional care. And the internet, predictably, attacked her for it. Let's be very clear about something. Managing frontotemporal dementia at an advanced stage is not a job for love alone. It requires specialized medical knowledge. It requires physical safety protocols. It requires people who have been trained to manage the sudden confusion, the potential for violent outbursts, the unpredictability that defines this disease. Doing it without that support, no matter how much you love someone, is not heroism. It's how caregivers die. Emma Willis protected her husband. She protected her daughters, and she protected herself so she could be present for all of them. That is not abandonment. That is what love actually looks like when the storybook version of it isn't an option anymore. The family that held. One of the things that has defined this story, quietly, without fanfare, is the remarkable way that Bruce Willis's family has held together around him. Demi Moore, his first wife, with whom he shares 3 daughters, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah, has been a constant and visible presence. Their divorce, back in 2000, was one of those rare Hollywood separations where 2 people genuinely prioritized the well-being of their children over their own hurt feelings or public narratives. Bruce attended Demi's wedding to Ashton Kutcher. He showed up. He made it work. Not because it was easy, but because his daughters needed to see that their parents could be in a room together without becoming their wounds. He once said in an interview that now reads like a kind of prophecy, "If you can rise above the anger and make your children the most important thing, then you have a shot at evolving into something your kids can look at and say, there is another way." And in the years since his diagnosis, Demi and Emma and the children have presented a united front that is, in the context of Hollywood, and perhaps in the context of human nature generally, almost without precedent. Photographs show Bruce surrounded by all of them, his ex-wife beside his current wife, his daughters reaching for him, everyone who loves him choosing to show up instead of pull away. Bruce told interviewers during his prime that his children were the most interesting people he knew, that he would step in front of a car for them without hesitation, that the moment each of them was born, and he was there for all of them, right there in the room, present in the exact way he said he wanted to be, was the moment he understood for the first time what the word love actually meant. Those children are grown now, and they are standing by him the way he stood by them. Some things are bigger than dementia.
There's a particular kind of shame that settles in when you learn the truth about a story you got completely wrong. For years, Bruce Willis was a punchline. He was the cautionary tale about what happens when a star stops trying. The YouTube essays that dissected his decline were watched by millions of people who had no idea they were watching a man lose access to his own mind in real time. The earpiece wasn't laziness. It was a man who could no longer hold his lines, being helped by someone who wanted him to keep being able to do the thing he loved. The sitting in chairs wasn't low effort. It was a man who could not always be trusted to navigate a set safely, being cared for by a crew who quietly built his scenes around his limitations. The blank expressions weren't boredom. They were a man who was, in those moments, unreachable, already somewhere the rest of the world didn't have access to. His legal team eventually came forward to clarify something important. Bruce Willis was not forced to keep making those films. He insisted on it. His own team confirmed that he wanted to keep working for as long as it was physically possible. He wanted to keep showing up. He wanted to keep being an actor. And when you remember the man who said he planned to work until he was a bag of bones, until he could fire one last bullet, until there was nothing left to give, that isn't surprising. It is completely and utterly in character. Bruce Willis did not phone it in during those final years. He showed up against every neurological odd and tried his best with what he had left. We owe him the acknowledgement of that. The legacy they can't take. Here is what frontotemporal dementia cannot touch. It cannot touch the memory of every person who watched Die Hard for the first time and felt somewhere in their chest the specific joy of a perfect movie doing exactly what it was made to do. It cannot touch the way an entire generation learned that action heroes could be funny and scared and bleeding and human because of Bruce Willis. It cannot undo the performances. It cannot unspool Pulp Fiction, or The Sixth Sense, or The Fifth Element, or any of the other films where Bruce Willis stood in front of a camera and gave something real. It cannot reach backwards and change the fact that a kid from New Jersey, with no connections, no industry family, no safety net, decided he was going to be an actor and then refused, absolutely refused, to stop until the world agreed with him. And perhaps most importantly, perhaps the thing that matters most when the final accounting is made, it cannot erase the family he built. Bruce Willis understood something about success that Hollywood usually gets exactly wrong. He understood that the awards and the box office numbers and the magazine covers are, in the end, furniture. They fill the room, but they don't warm it. What warms it is the person who knows you, who was there when you were terrified and admitted it, who watched you hold your children when they were born and saw your face change into something that couldn't be performed or manufactured. He has that. Whatever the disease has taken, it has not taken that. The people who love Bruce Willis are not visiting a legend. They are not making pilgrimages to an icon. They are going to see their person, their father, their husband, the man who sat at the kitchen table, and the man who stumbled through auditions, and the man who once stood in front of a camera and made something that will last longer than any of us. They are showing up because showing up is what he taught them. The story he completed. Bruce Willis may not fully understand anymore the shape of what he built. He may not be able to reach back and find the memories, the awards, the sets, the characters, the applause. The disease that is rewriting his brain does not respect legacy or achievement or the weight of what a life has meant. But here is what his wife says he still has. When his family walks into the room, when his daughters reach for him, when the people who have loved him for decades are close enough to touch, he can feel it. Not as information, not as a name or a history or a narrative he can trace, as warmth, as presence, as something that does not require language to be real. Bruce Willis spent his entire adult life insisting against the pull of Hollywood and fame and the seductions of ego that the people around him mattered more than the work, more than the money, more than the legacy. He was right. And in the room where he lives now, surrounded by photographs and by the people who refuse to let him disappear without a fight, the evidence of that is everywhere. Bruce Willis did not lose his story. He finished it. And the ending, quiet and private and full of love in a way no action sequence ever could be, is exactly the one he always said he wanted. He went home. He's still there.